Today, we are exploring an often overlooked but increasingly important part of the climate equation, the role of water infrastructure and specifically wastewater in greenhouse gas emissions. And while most conversations focus on CO2 and methane, there's a growing recognition of super pollutants like nitrous oxide, which have a disproportionate impact on climate, nearly 300 times more potent than CO2. What's been missing until recently is visibility and action. Many systems, N2O has gone unmeasured and unmanaged, making it one of the more under-recognized opportunities in climate today. That's now starting to change as regulation, measurement, and accountability begin to catch up. Cobalt Water Global has been building ahead of this shift, working at the intersection of water and climate to help utilities measure, reduce, and ultimately capture value from these emissions. This isn't a speculative entry point. The company is already actively deploying with utility customers and demonstrated results, delivering significant N2O reductions alongside of improvements in energy efficiency and water quality. Today's session will explore why N2O mitigation is emerging now, how Cobalt Water is translating deep technical expertise into scalable real-world deployment. And I'm very pleased to introduce Jose Porro, CEO and founder of Cobalt Water Global. Jose is widely recognized as one of the world's leading experts on nitrous oxide emissions in wastewater, and his work has helped shape how the industry understands, measures, and now actively reduces N2O. At Cobalt, he's translating that expertise into a platform approach, working with utilities and partners globally to deliver measurable emissions reductions and operational gains. So, without further ado, welcome, Jose, and take it away.
Thanks, Kevin, for the intro, and thanks everyone for joining. We're really pleased to be here to talk about what we're doing, helping the water industry to decarbonize, and specifically decarbonizing wastewater treatment. And when we talk about wastewater, historically it's been an overlooked source of greenhouse gas emissions, particularly nitrous oxide, and Kevin touched on it's a 300 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas. It's a super pollutant and historically has been invisible and unmanaged in wastewater treatment, but that's now changing. Regulation is driving water utilities to monitor and reduce N2O emissions from their wastewater treatment plants, and it's really turning it into a new compliance-driven market. So we've built the platform that enables water utilities to plan, measure, and reduce and even monetize their wastewater greenhouse gas emissions. And we've already deployed with leading utilities and partners across Europe and North America. And we're starting with N2O because that's what we really dominate. However, the vision is to expand the approach to start tackling methane and CO2, which are both also byproducts of the wastewater treatment process. So nitrous oxide is wastewater's most potent yet least managed greenhouse gas. We talked about the massive impact in terms of the global warming potential. We mentioned it's a super pollutant, so it's not only just a climate threat, it's also a threat to our health from an air quality standpoint. It's also an ozone depleting gas. And we've actually made a lot of progress in protecting the ozone layer, but nothing has been done to deter nitrous oxide emissions. And if we continue to allow nitrous oxide to be emitted uncontrollably from our wastewater treatment plants, all of that progress can start to reverse itself. It's historically been underestimated because it's difficult to measure. So using generic emission factor approaches like through IPCC, it's been found to underestimate the emissions from as much as by 40 to 60%. And 2O is also highly variable across seasons and across different operational conditions. And because of all this, and because it's not only difficult to measure, it's also expensive to measure, utilities have largely not managed it at all. And it's also complex. There's complex biochemical processes going on in order to understand what's happening and how it can be controlled. And there's really up to date, really been um, regulatory and economic drivers that have been lacking to measure and control it. But as mentioned, that's changing. And what's changed is really that there's now regulation and net zero commitments. Utilities are now being required to measure and reduce N2O emissions, particularly in Europe, but we're seeing similar momentum in North America. We're also seeing a wave of tenders in response to these requirements. And this is really making it a budgeted and immediate need. And this shift has also been turning N2O from just being a known issue and maybe something that water utilities have been starting to explore and get a handle on into a required operational metric. And so utilities are now needing solutions that are compliant and validated and ready to deploy. And that's really created what's this new and emerging market where there's already strong demand and we're seeing it firsthand. And the best part is that our our solution is perfectly designed to meet this demand. And this is actually by accident because we've been working on N2O for a long time because it was something that we knew everyone was eventually going to have to do. And we were right. There's this market that's now developed around what we've already been doing. So in terms of the solution, we built a full stack platform, call it the all-in-one N2O reduction platform. And it covers the whole value chain from initially assessing N2O. We use AI to understand where the highest emissions are in terms of which wastewater treatment plants and where the biggest opportunities to reduce N2O are. We help water utilities measure them accurately. We have more experience measuring than anyone. So it only makes sense to offer this. But we also use the AI to apply this deep domain expertise to help them reduce the emissions and ultimately provide an end-to-end digital solution that doesn't just help them monitor the emissions, but also helps them verify reductions for either verifying progress towards their net zero goals or for issuing carbon credits. So the system combines off-the-shelf sensors with our software platform. So the good thing is that we're not having to build sensors. This would be a totally different thing and be a lot more difficult to scale. We do make our own gas collection hoods as shown here. But that's much easier to fabricate and much cheaper to fabricate. But when we're integrating everything, we're able to integrate with existing plant systems. We're able to process the data, start to offer key insights on how to reduce the N2O emissions and also helping them to quantify the emissions just using the data because normally you can only measure in one specific location of the plant due to the cost, but we can use data to quantify the emissions for the entire plant. And what's also important is that we can work with both historical data and also real-time data and offer this as either an offline tool or an online tool. And this makes it useful for both operations, but also for planning and compliance. And what really matters is that this works. We've consistently shown that we can achieve significant reductions of N2O, up to 90%. And we've shown this in 6 treatment plants across 5 different utilities, 4 different countries, across all 4 seasons. And this is really important to show because N2O is highly variable. So if we can show that it works everywhere, this is the validation that we need because it is highly variable. And what's good is that not only is this providing an environmental benefit, but we've seen in cases where, depending on the size of the treatment plant, it can also result in energy savings anywhere from like $20,000 per year to $200,000 per year. And this is important because it also provides economic value or additional benefits besides just the environmental ones. In terms of the model, the business model, we're primarily a recurring uh, hardware as a service, measurement as a service, and SaaS. On top of that, there's a meaningful upside from carbon credits, especially as high integrity measurement-based credits demand a premium. And we're also basically both an infrastructure software business, but also carbon revenue opportunity. And we've already gained significant traction. This has resulted in 22 customers across various countries. We've also have had 100% conversion from pilot to subscription. We've won the majority of the tenders that have been out there, and we have multi-year commercial partnerships with multiple partners in different countries to scale to hundreds of sites. So at this point, it's not really early validation that we're trying to achieve. At this point, we're in active deployment. And we partner with key players in the ecosystem. So Xylem is our main global partner, but we're not exclusive. We work with other partners in particular countries. But this is helpful for really scaling our product because they're operating in a lot of countries. We also work with leading climate tech and academic partners. And what this really helps to do is to really accelerate and continue to advance the technology. And in addition to that, it really helps the defensibility. Let's talk about the market. So wastewater N2O represents a high value infrastructure driven decarbonization market. And it's a multi-billion dollar market. The core is an operational market for monitoring and mitigation, but there's a similarly large emerging carbon market tied to the emissions reduction. And what's important is that this is an infrastructure-driven, regulation-backed market, which really makes it durable. And in terms of the ask, well, we're raising $4 million to scale N2O monitoring and reduction across wastewater infrastructure globally. This includes expanding with existing partners, winning more tenders, and continuing to build out the platform. You could say that in terms of the platform roadmap, we're basically at the iPhone 1 level, but we're already have the iPhone 17 mapped out and eager to start building. So that's the overview. Happy to dig a little bit deeper into part of the discussion. Thanks.
All right. So feel free to put your, if you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A. We do have some questions here, which we'll jump into. So um, question one is in regards to, how do utilities actually buy this solution? What's the sales cycle like for this solution?
Well, it depends on really how it's being sold. So we do sell it directly to water utilities. They're the ultimate end user and customer. But depending on the situation, so if we're working with partners, they might be providing the service to the utility directly, and we're acting as sort of like a subcontractor to them so that they're our immediate customer, um, and the utility is their direct customer. So depending on the situation, either the partner is buying a subscription that then gets offered as part of their solution to the water utility, or the utilities are buying and paying for subscriptions themselves. And this gives them, depending on whether they need measurements or not, it can include the measurements, or it could just be a subscription to the software to start getting insights either in real time or offline.
And can you, it's a question regarding, can you speak to the urgency for today? You had mentioned that this previously wasn't as big a deal or hasn't been historically. Is the urgency coming from primarily from regulation, or are there other forces pushing utilities to act now? And can you talk about what that looks like, sort of with your global experience?
Yeah, it's a little different in different countries, but generally it's either net zero targets that are being needing to be met. For example, in the UK, water utilities have signed an agreement to be net zero by 2030. Similarly, in Australia and Denmark, they have these 2030 net zero targets that the water utilities have signed on to. In terms of actual regulation, we're also seeing in Europe, the European Commission has revised the Urban Wastewater Framework Directive and now requires water utilities to monitor their emissions, including methane and nitrous oxide. And the all of the European member states by 2027 have to submit their proposed regulation on that. So all of them are going to have to regulate and require the monitoring and the proposed, I guess, how each member state is going to regulate it. That's due to the European Commission by 2027, which is next year. So this is all creating this urgency. That's why we're seeing tenders coming out. This is why we're seeing people paying for our solution because they don't want to wait and be not meeting the compliance deadlines.
And I know that, so we're going to do a demo and actually a question here in terms of making it tangible. What does a typical deployment for Cobalt Water Global look like in practice?
So again, it depends on what is needed because it is this all-in-one solution and it can be used for planning, it can be used for monitoring, it can be used for mitigation. Um, it really depends at what step in the journey the customer is. If they're starting at the very beginning, have a number of wastewater treatment plants that they need to start measuring and reducing N2O from, but don't know which ones they should be going to first, they can use our platform. So they'll pay for a subscription. And then if they have just the historical data for each of the wastewater treatment plants, they can upload it to the platform to start getting predictions on why there's N2O, what actions can be taken to reduce it, what the emissions are, and this is within reasonable accuracy. It's not intended to be perfect because the objective is to go and ultimately go and physically measure to verify what the actual emissions are. But we've shown that with our platform, we can get within like 10 to 20% of what the actual emissions are when we're just using their process data before they measure N2O. So that would be like the very first step. If they're at the very beginning, then the idea would be that they now have a list of treatment plants that they go and physically measure the N2O emissions from. And if they need if they need assistance with the measurements, we'll offer that as a service. So we'll go with equipment to start measuring particular treatment plants over the course of a year, um, to understand what the baseline is. We can also baseline and reduce at the same time. We have an approach where we're measuring what the current operation or the emissions from the current operation is, but then for other parts of the treatment plant, and if they have parallel uh, treatment trains, they can actually start mitigating. So we can measure the reductions at the same time. This is something we actually encourage because otherwise you can lose a whole year just trying to baseline and then start reducing. And then you don't really have a solid baseline either because the conditions change from year to year. So it's really difficult to compare what the emissions were from last year to what the emissions are this year when the baseline for this year would actually probably be different from last year's. So that's why we try to do it at the same time. But um, if they're already, a lot of them are already measuring, which makes it easier. So in those cases, it's just a matter of getting their measurement data, and we can immediately start providing them insights, whether it's real time or offline. But that's how the deployment would look like if they're already measuring, and if they're already measuring, already wanting to start reducing, then we just start from where they are in the journey and take them all the way through the mitigation and then the monitoring, because you don't just mitigate and forget about it. You still have to continue to monitor and continue to mitigate, because the conditions are always going to be changing. So what you do today might work today, but it might not work tomorrow or next week or in the springtime. So you're continuously having to monitor and continuously needing to mitigate.
So before we jump into a little demo here, we did have a question on related to sort of to the pain for utilities. If a utility does nothing, what's the financial regulatory downside over the next 2, 3 years? How does that hit a utility if they don't take care of this issue?
Well, I mean, in the EU, if they're not reporting their emissions by the deadlines that each member state sets, then they're not going to be in compliance. So I guess that results in fines that because the member states haven't yet submitted what that exactly is going to look like to the European Commission. We don't know what we're talking about in terms of fines, but generally, yeah, you don't want to be non-compliant, because that just puts you on a negative path and negative position with the regulatory bodies.
Got it. Great. Well, really helpful context, and let's bring this to life more. Can you walk us through the platform, show it how it actually works in practice?
Sure. So I have a few slides to kind of introduce it. We can start with. So, and I guess what we'll start with, we'll get to the very source of N2O emissions. So basically, it comes from us. Uh, we consume protein, which is nitrogen, and in our urine, it's in the form of urea. So this is what gets flushed down the toilet, goes into the sewers, and in the sewers, by the time it gets to the treatment plant, this urea gets transformed into ammonia. And ammonia is very toxic in the water environment, in the receiving water body environment. So the treatment process converts this ammonia to less harmful forms of nitrogen. And in that process is where you can produce the nitrous oxide. But you don't have to produce it. If you operate the treatment process in the right way, you can convert this ammonia without producing the nitrous oxide. So this is what we want to do. I mean, a lot of people talk about like trying to offset and planting trees to offset emissions, but what we want to do is actually reduce these emissions, and we use our AI and machine learning platform to do that. So once it's at the treatment plant, you have different processes happening, and you have depending on what the effluent water quality requirements are, you could potentially have denitrification and nitrification, and you can produce N2O from both of these processes. So these are the processes that are converting the nitrogen to less harmful forms of nitrogen. Um, and we've done a lot of research to really understand how this N2O is formed on a metabolic level. But the good thing is, because of the research, we don't need to know what's happening in a metabolic level, because we've been able to link it to what we see on an operational level and what we see or measure from sensors. So, for example, one of the things that you need for the biological wastewater treatment is to add air into the wastewater so that the bacteria that breaks down the waste can do their job. So as they break down this ammonia, they need to have oxygen. But depending on how much they have, they'll either produce N2O or not. So if you have too much oxygen, they'll produce N2O. But if you have too little oxygen, and this is and it's actually dissolved oxygen in the water, that's DO. If they have too little, they also produce the N2O. So the trick is to have the right amount of oxygen at the right time. But that is very difficult to do. So you're almost always going to have a bit of an imbalance, and depending on how much this imbalance is, that's how much N2O you can produce. So from the research, we know the conditions under which you have higher N2O or higher risk of forming N2O. So because we know these conditions, the goal is to avoid them. And so we've been able to leverage this knowledge and apply AI techniques uh, to basically mimic the reasoning process that an expert would follow in looking at the data and saying whether there's a problem or not, and if so, what is needed to mitigate it and to reduce the N2O emissions. So we use this, it's called knowledge-based AI. And the knowledge-based AI is what we use to quantify the risk. So we can generate a dynamic risk profile. So at any given moment in time, we know why, if there's N2O, why there's N2O, and what we need to do to reduce it. But we also use machine learning to predict what the actual N2O emissions are, because the knowledge-based AI is not telling you how much emissions you have, it's telling you why you have it and what you need to do to reduce it. So this is what is that's what is behind the platform. But before we go to the platform, to give you a little crash course on how to read these risk graphs that the knowledge-based AI is generating. So when we see uh, this red here, these peaks of red, these are peaks of risk due to high risk of N2O formation due to high dissolved oxygen conditions. So when you see this, this means that the process is under high risk of N2O formation due to high dissolved oxygen conditions. When we see the blue, it's when the process is under high risk of N2O formation due to low DO conditions. So this is in this example, we're seeing that it's shifting back and forth from the high DO risk and the low DO risk. But the idea is, ideally, we want to see very little risk. I've yet to see a case where there's zero risk. So there's always going to be a little bit. So the trick is to try to minimize it. And then, so we also want to understand what's happening in the process in relation to this risk. So we have the ability to plot other things like the water quality parameter. So this orange is ammonia. So this is what is being reduced, what we want to reduce, but without forming N2O. And we can also add, if they're measuring the N2O or if we're predicting the N2O, we can plot the N2O with the ammonia and the risk. So here you can see an example of where this ammonia is being reduced, which is what we want, but because it's under this low DO risk, we see N2O getting formed. So this is what we want to avoid. We want this, but we don't want this. And so this is being formed because the dissolved oxygen at this time is too low. As you go further into the day, then you run into a situation where now you're reducing this ammonia under high DO conditions. And here you see, as this is coming down, you see N2O forming. So this, we want to avoid this. We want this. So this is, we want to see this, but we don't want to see this. But this is telling us that this is because of high DO risk. So at this moment in time, the dissolved oxygen is too high. So yeah, so this is what we want to avoid. Um, we want to avoid that high DO risk when your ammonia is going up. And then when you're actually treating this ammonia, you want to avoid risk. This is what we do want to see. We want to see ammonia being converted. So you can see here with the low risk, N2O is actually going down now. The N2O that you formed, you stopped forming it, but you're continuing to reduce your ammonia so that now it's just under low DO risk. So this is what we want. And again, this is what we want to avoid. We don't want to see um, treating ammonia under high DO risk and N2O forming. So let's jump to the platform now so you can see this in the platform. Okay, so after you've logged in, it takes you to the main dashboard. And the first thing that you're going to see is the risk. So here we can click to see, okay, what does a low DO risk look like? So we see quite a bit of low DO risk, but if we turn on the high DO risk, we see quite a bit of high DO risk. At this time, so, and there was a gap where they weren't measuring, they didn't provide data, but here we're seeing a shift from what's mainly this high DO risk to this low DO risk. And this is actually normal. We see this a lot where during the warmer months, they tend to bring down the oxygen. And that's actually on purpose because they can get actually more treatment with less oxygen, which saves them energy and energy costs. Um, but this also at this level kind of helps us understand how the risk is evolving because it does change throughout the year, as we can see here. We also see the times that they were physically measuring the N2O. So you see this purple. So there are gaps in this. This is also common that there's gaps in the data because there tends to be issues with the sensors. Either they expire because they only last for like 6 months, or they go out of calibration, or something goes wrong with the cables. Uh, but with our machine learning, we're able to fill these periods. Um, Actually, if we turn on the predicted N2O, you'll be able to see how we can fill those gaps. You can zoom in here. We can turn the risk off so we can better see. So here we can see that there's the measured N2O and then it stopped, but our machine learning can fill this in. And we've tested this, I've tested this quite a bit to understand that, yeah, this is an accurate way of filling these gaps. But also, so at this level, it's more to understand how things are evolving. It's not so much to understand what's actually going on because we really need to zoom in. And we can zoom into any period in time to get a better idea of what's actually happening. Um, so we're seeing is where consistently you have switching back and forth from the high DO risk to the low DO risk. We have higher N2O here, so we can zoom in here, see what's happening. Maybe we'll turn off the predicted. But like in that example that I was showing you, here we're seeing where you have N2O going up under these peaks of the high DO risk. And here we can zoom in a little more. And this just keeps repeating. So based on how they're controlling the plant, this pattern just keeps repeating. So we keep seeing N2O going up. So let's turn on the ammonia. Now the ammonia is in a much higher range in terms of concentration. So now if we turn on ammonia, it's harder to see the N2O, but we can normalize the data with this button. And now we can better see the trends. So now the data is normalized in relation to each other. And now we see this is what we want to see. We want to see ammonia coming down, but we don't want to see this N2O going up. And this is happening exactly underneath these peaks of the high DO risk. And if we turn on the oxygen, so the gray is where their dissolved oxygen actually is. So they're bringing it up to this level to bring down this ammonia. But with our AI, we can tell them where they should be to avoid this peak of risk. So this is saying that this cyan is what the recommended DO is. So it's basically telling them instead of being up here, you should be down here. And this will help bring this risk peak down, which we know will bring this N2O down. Because we have countless data showing how when there's higher risk, there's higher N2O. So we can trust recommendations to reduce the risk. We can trust that they'll reduce the N2O. Because this recommended DO is looking at what the risk is, and looks at what the existing dissolved oxygen is, and then it makes a recommendation. And we know we can trust it because we know when there's higher risk, there's higher N2O, and when there's lower risk, there's lower N2O. But we know we can trust it because, as I mentioned earlier, we know it works. We've achieved up to 90% reductions in the N2O. And then depending on what other data is available, I mean, the graphs will start to get really messy, but you have a choice to turn on and off a lot of different things to zero in on what you want to try to zero in on. We can also download the data, but here we can specify whether we have diffused aeration or surface aeration, because depending on which one you're using, the equations to calculate the emissions is different. And here you can also put in the tank dimensions, because this is basically what we would see in one reactor or in a particular zone of a reactor. And here's where we can upload data. If we have data downloaded um, from the control system, you can select the data here to visualize, or if you've already uploaded, you can choose from whatever data sets you've already uploaded. But that's basically it.
The question is, the risk indicator is related to N2O generation, like a liquid phase, or is it about N2O gas emission, or is it a combination of, sounds like liquid and gas?
It's really both. So the examples that we were looking at were examples where the N2O was measured in the liquid phase. And as we can see, it correlates very closely with what is being measured in the liquid phase. But we've also have plotted it with the risk with gas phase measurements, and it follows the same patterns. And this is because like where you're measuring the N2O, it gets formed in the liquid, and then because it's being aerated, it gets forced from the liquid phase into the gas phase. And when that happens, that's when it becomes um, global warming threat once it's in the atmosphere. And it gets, and because it gets stripped basically immediately, what you measure in the gas phase is pretty much what if you had a sensor, and we've also done this because we've measured gas phase and liquid phase at the same time, on a lot of different occasions, and the profiles basically are identical, which is telling us that what is being formed in the liquid is immediately getting stripped and put into the gas phase. So it doesn't matter whether you have gas phase data or liquid phase data, you can still use the risk the same way.
Thank you. What's the hardest part from your perspective? What's the hardest part of solving the N2 emissions in wastewater? And then to add on to that, I would like if you could speak to, what's your differentiator as a company? So are there other companies doing this? You said that you've won the majority of the tenders or RFPs to make this solution. So can you talk to sort of the difficulty and the challenge and what differentiates Cobalt Water?
Yeah, so I think that the hardest thing is not so much the technical part of it, because we've proven um, time and time again that we can tackle into it. We can measure it, we can model it, we can reduce it. So from a technical standpoint, it's easy. What is hard is getting funding. So utilities are sometimes are struggling. I mean, they're always struggling for cash. Um, so I guess funding is can be a barrier, even though that's going away in a lot of places. So I think it was forget the exact number, it was like 300 million, 200 million that the UK government has allocated specifically to reduce N2O from wastewater treatment plants. There's also this super pollutant initiative that's started by Amazon, JP Morgan Chase, and other big names to fund uh, abatement of super pollutants. So there is more funding, so it's becoming less of a barrier, but depending on the specific utility, they may or may not have access to funding. The other difficulty is in, I guess, putting all the pieces together, because there's a lot involved. It's not just measurements, it's data. You have data issues. You have quantification challenges. There's modeling challenges. There's the monitoring, long-term monitoring. You have the equipment. So putting all these pieces together can be difficult, but that's also where we come in because we are the all-in-one platform, putting all these pieces together so that um, it becomes less of a barrier and we can scale it. And if we want to really accomplish our mission as a company is to reduce as much N2O as possible, as fast as possible. So the way to do that is to really have a solution that puts all these pieces together so you don't have these barriers, but also a model that allows you to work with as many partners as possible to offer the solution in different ways and be able to really maximize the impact that way.
And
In terms of like a differentiator,
yeah,
I think what we're seeing is that because we have the most experience, we've been working on it the longest. Our solution is the most validated. No one has the mitigation cases that we have. So I think all of this and the expertise. So I think a lot of the solutions that are out there lack that deep are not really backed by the deep domain expertise that's been um, generated over, I guess in my case, I started working on it in 2009. So we're already um, what is that, 17 years?
yeah, it's a bit. And you've collected data too, right? Is that also part of it? Is that
Yeah, because we've been working on it the longest, we have the most data, which really helps, especially with trying to predict what the N2O emissions are when you don't have N2O emissions data. So the alternative is to use generic emission factors or try to use what we call mechanistic models that are not calibrated. And we've seen that it's a real challenge to have confidence in the results of those models without calibrating them with measurement data. But we've been able to test our model library with real measurements and have been finding that it comes within 10 to 20%, sometimes 30%, depending on the situation. But that's we're not trying to be perfect when we don't have N2O data. We're trying to be good enough to know where we should be going to first. So having been working on N2O the longest, having all of this data really puts us in a position to be able to guide people in a way that others can't.
so? We're getting close to the end here, but there are some few more questions. One is just to talk a little bit about the market and the business case for Cobalt Water Global. Can you talk about timing a little bit more in this space and what specifically has changed to make a real difference in the market right now?
So did you say timing?
Yeah, like the timing where we're at right now in the space, whether that's you had mentioned previously that there's more regulation, regulatory requirements coming now that's different. Is there anything else from a market timing standpoint that you think is important about where we're at in this moment for Cobalt Water and as you commercialize?
Yeah, I mean we're in a very exciting time. And as I mentioned, we've been working on N2O for a long time. When there was no market for it, there was genuine excuse me, genuine interest in wanting to be more sustainable and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, but this was more organic within the water utilities. There was no hard driver to be measuring and reducing N2O. Now there is. So for someone who's been working on N2O for a long time, it's we're at a moment where we can finally say there's a market for it. There are hard drivers, regulatory and economic drivers for it. And we're timing wise, it's good. It's actually good that we've been working on N2O for so long and have a solution that's ready to be scaled and deployed, as opposed to being in a moment where now we really need solutions and we haven't really been working on it for a long time, which I guess you could say is the case for like our competitors. Now we didn't have competitors for a long time, but now we do, but it's mainly because now there's a market for it. So they're kind of just responding to address the market and look at it from a business opportunity as opposed to being a mission like it is for us.
And is it a primarily a compliance driven spend or is there broader economic case?
No, there's definitely a broader economic case, and this is what I guess puts us in a good position because what we've seen is that when you have higher N2O emissions, it's also when you have poor process efficiency for like treatment process efficiency. So it's similar to like a combustion engine. So if you have a combustion engine that's operating inefficiently, it's going to have higher emissions of carbon monoxide and NOx and other things. In wastewater treatment, you could say wastewater treatment plants are similar, where when they're operating inefficiently, you have higher emissions of N2O. So actions that are taken to reduce N2O, like for an example that we saw in the demo, they had too much dissolved oxygen. So to reduce the N2O in that case, they would have to reduce the dissolved oxygen, which means that they would be reducing their energy consumption. So potentially saving a lot of money in terms of energy consumption, in addition to reducing the N2O. And we also see that they get better treatment. So in multiple cases, we've seen where they got better nitrogen removal because they were better managing the aeration and the dissolved oxygen. They got better phosphorus removal because they're also better managing the oxygen. They also reduced their energy consumption and they reduced their N2O. So they already had three wins before they even got to the N2O from taking actions to reduce the N2O. So there are these additional co-benefits that really helps sell the solution as well.
Got it. So let me throw two more questions at you and then we will conclude here the session for today. Let's talk about scaling. What does scaling this look like to hundreds of thousands of treatment plants? What is Cobalt Water's scaling strategy?
Well, to basically accomplish our mission, which is scaling as much as we can, uh, I guess we need a few things. So first of all is partners. So even if we grow to a really large team and have hundreds of employees, we're still only going to be hundreds of employees when we have millions of billions of people uh, who are generating urine and waste that should be going to wastewater treatment plants. So we're going to be able to do this on our own. So partnerships are really important, and it's great that we've been able to secure key commercial partnerships with people like Xylem and others. So partnerships are critical. Also, having the the solution um, where we're able to combine measurements with modeling, or have an easy way of processing data. I think all of this is important because otherwise, if it becomes very labor intensive and manual, you're never going to be able to get through thousands of treatment plants. So having the strong digital component is key as well. Um, and I think, yeah, I think the fact that we have the the co-benefits, the fact that there's now funding from government specifically to reduce N2O, the fact that there's initiatives like the super pollutant initiative, and the fact that we now have regulation requiring utilities to measure and reduce N2O, is all kind of creating a perfect storm to be able to scale this widely.
Great. So, final question here, and I want to thank everybody for coming. Stepping back, how do you see this evolving beyond N2O? Is there other applications for Cobalt Water's solution?
Yeah, I think I mentioned in the beginning that that is the vision to expand the approach, um, to start tackling methane, because methane is another big source of greenhouse gas emissions for wastewater treatment. Uh, and you have a lot of the same issues, but also CO2. CO2 is currently being spewed from wastewater treatment plants as part of it's one of the end products of the wastewater treatment. So you actually can't avoid producing the CO2 if you're doing if you're doing the wastewater treatment, you're producing the CO2, and it's not counted in the greenhouse gas inventories of water utilities because it's considered to be biogenic. Um, but it's still CO2 that's going into atmosphere and contributing to global warming. So if there's a way to either capture it, which there are solutions out there to capture CO2 from wastewater, um, or to turn it into something uh, from a like circular economy standpoint, that is going to help a lot. So that is the plan to expand the approach to start to tackling other wastewater greenhouse gas emissions. But yeah, we're starting with N2O because that's where the deep domain expertise lies. So we want to start with from a position of strength, but then having the success with N2O, then want to translate that to methane and CO2. You could look even beyond wastewater too, because you have the same processes, nitrification, happening in soils. So agriculture, actually, the N2O emissions from agriculture actually dwarf the emissions from wastewater. And you still have a lot of the same issues. You can't physically measure everywhere because it just would be cost prohibitive. Uh, so there is the opportunity to combine measurements with modeling, and then there are ways you can actually reduce the N2O from managing the soils better. So, but we're starting with N2O and wastewater, and then we'll see about where we're at to see if we can do something about agriculture.
Fantastic. Well, it's been a super insightful discussion. Thank you for walking us through the technology and the financial opportunity. It sounds like you're well on the way. And if anybody wants to contact you, what's the best way to do that?
I would say by email. So I think we can, or LinkedIn. So I think most people are registering through LinkedIn first. So yeah, just find me on LinkedIn. Don't hesitate to reach out.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And thanks everybody for coming. And we'll conclude the event for today. Thank you, Jose.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.